Hey, Chandler Bolt here, and joining me today is James Altucher. James is the author of 20 books, including his book, Choose Yourself. He's also the host of the James Altucher Show, which has over 40 million downloads. Crazy. And we're going to talk about that later. He's really a prolific writer and just, I think, one of the most unique blends of analytical and creative. It's like almost unheard of, and I haven't met anyone like him. In the sense that he used to be a hedge fund manager. So like very much knows the numbers, analytical. I would imagine, I mean, I haven't confirmed this, but I would imagine off the charts IQ. And just definitely the vibe that I pick up. But then also does stand-up comedy. Your writing is hilarious, like just kind of across the board. And so I think that's the part that I'm really interested to hear and learn more about. Today, we're going to talk about writing. We're going to talk about using books to grow your business, your brand. We might even talk a little bit about podcasting. Who knows? I am very excited for this interview. James, welcome.
Chandler, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. And that was a great intro. No one's ever kind of said, oh, this kind of combination of analytical and other. And I was just thinking about it. And it's interesting because I do have an analytical background. Like I was a computer science major, being a hedge fund manager, I had to do a lot to calculate numbers and do mathematical modeling. And so it was interesting when, for instance, this virus happened, I was very much looking at all the mathematical models that were going out there, plus all the economic models. And I found a big disconnect between what the models were saying, what the media was saying, what consumers were afraid of. And I was able to kind of bridge my skills a little bit, and I don't know, this has nothing to do with the podcast, but it was just interesting for me. I was able to kind of help people interpret the data, or at least look at the data in different ways. But yes, big fan of your career. I love how you dropped out of college. I hope that was because of something I wrote. And then you started a self-publishing school, which also I hope was because of something I wrote. I'm sure it wasn't in either case, but I've definitely been excited about both of those themes. And you're hitting it, like you're hitting it out of the park. So how's business?
Yeah, it's really good, man. It's really good. And obviously we're seeing a big boom with COVID and things like that. But I'm curious because I was really trying to, I was looking, scrolling through Amazon, looking everywhere, and I couldn't find a concrete number. How many books have you actually written? And how many of those were self-published versus traditionally published?
So I think I've written, and by written, so let me say, I think I've published 25. I've written more, but I think I've published 25. And, in there, I have a children's book. I have one or two books under pseudonyms. So that's why not all of them. I have one book on Scribd that's not on Amazon. And that's a fairly extensive book that came out about a year ago. And I just wrote another one, which is going to be published in February. And I would say self-published 2/3, mainstream published 1/3. And okay. The reason is that maybe 2 or 3 of my self-published ones were kind of like experiments to see, hey, how does this work? And so on. So I almost don't count those, but I do. And my children's book was self-published. And then I've given myself various book challenges, which were self-published. So that kind of inflates the self-published numbers a little bit. But I would say I've seriously self-published it's about 50-50 self-published versus mainstream.
Cool. That's great. And then how many are you sitting on that are written but unpublished besides the one that's coming out in February?
Probably right now, 3. 3 or 4. It depends on what I do.
And so how do you decide when to publish those or why sit on those to begin with?
I may never publish them. It's just if I get the urge one weekend, oh, I should publish this book, I'll publish it. And then some things I may have out there that I'm waiting to add to, when I feel like it. I don't know. Like, you also have to be careful too. You don't want to dilute any message that's important to you and just for the sake of publishing. We both know there are a lot of people out there who have self-published hundreds of books and do quite well. That's almost a business model unto itself, self-publishing a book a month. And if you have 100 books out there and on average, each self-published book brings in $500, then you're making, even if each self-published book brings in $200 on average per month, that's $20,000 a month if you have 100 self-published books. And that's certainly possible. I often recommend to my own listeners and readers that this is a viable business model. So, I think though, for me, I take self-publishing, I don't want to say seriously because it acts like those people don't take it seriously, but I always think in terms of what I call professional self-publishing,
Right.
which is that, I want to do the same thing that a HarperCollins will do, except I'll do it. And with the idea that, I may or may not do it better, but the idea is that I'll hire a professional cover designer, a professional layout designer, a professional interior designer, professional proofreader, professional editor, which is different from proofreading, and someone to help me, with the various formats. I'll make my own audiobook in a professional studio, and then that's a little bit different when let's say call it casual self-publishing, where I write a book, upload it to Amazon, hit publish, hit yes, I'll make it a paperback, and that's a little bit different. So I like to think like books like, so my most successful book ever is a book called Choose Yourself, and that was self-published, and I professionally self-published that almost as if it was a publishing company.
And I love that, and I definitely want to talk about that book here in a second. I think you've got a mix between, you're both prolific, and as you would say, you choose to professionally self-publish versus casual self-publishing, but you also write and publish a lot of books. So it's like it's a high volume of professionally, or mostly, as you said, professionally self-published books. So like, what's your methodology behind that? And or actually, I want to get into the writing process in just a little bit, but like, how do you do that? And then also, how do you make a decision between self-publishing, traditional publishing? Because I know on one hand, it's like you're very much an advocate of self-publishing, an advocate of dropping out of school, like a lot of those kind of like things that overlap. But then also, when appropriate, you traditionally publish some of your books. Like your next one, I think, is traditionally published with HarperCollins. So how do you make those decisions?
I would say in general, I err towards self-publishing. And there's a lot of reasons, all the reasons which I'm sure you've described many times on your podcast and in your course. But the obvious ones being you control the publishing date, you control the editing, you control the marketing, and controlling the marketing is very important. And we can get into that later. You can do things on your own when you own the book that the publisher either can't do or is not flexible enough to do. It's a very different experience. But, it's also good to mix things up. So I haven't, I always like to experiment. I haven't traditionally published in a few years, maybe 2014. I don't even remember. I forget. 2014 or 2015 I published with Hay House a book. And now, but yes, this next book, I am publishing with HarperCollins. And it was a big decision because I've been having lunch once a year with a literary agent, one of the biggest literary agents out there. And she was always saying, hey, let me give it a try. Let me give it a try. Do you have any ideas? And I always have ideas for books. And I always would say to her, well, I can do A, B, C, D, E, F. What can you do for me? And she said, I don't know. How about we just give it a try? And so finally, I said, we were having lunch. This was like a few months ago, or more than that. Must have been, a few months ago. It was like 20 years ago now. We were having lunch at some point last year. And I said, okay, let's give it a try. And I have to say, I had an experience with traditional publishing that I had never had before. Like, she was so amazingly above and beyond professional. And then it ended up with an editor at HarperCollins that I had worked with in the past, and probably the editor in the industry I respect the most. And it's been a great experience. There has been some of the downsides of traditional publishing, but there's been upsides too, working with such a great editor that I admire. And I'll just say on the agent side, she practically, just based on notes that from the lunch and from an email that I wrote her, she put together the whole proposal, like she wrote it. She made the appointments with every single publisher. We went to each publisher, and she did such a great intro and everybody was excited. And then she said, okay, on Monday, I'm going to hold an auction. And I had never been through that. And I figured she would be calling me throughout the day. Like, oh, so-and-so just offered this. What should I do? So-and-so just offered this. What should I do? She just calls me at the end of the day. And she said, okay, we went through 3 rounds of the auction. I got together all the first offers. I eliminated the bottom half, got together all the second offers, eliminated everybody except the top 2, and then got the final offer. We sold the book. Here's what it is. Are we good to go? And I said, yeah. So it was such a professional job. I sorry I went into length in that story, but I finally got to see what a real professional agent was. I've had bad agents, and most agents are not so good, I would say. And she was amazing. And so I just have to, Suzanne Gluck at William Morris, I just have to shout it out. And by the way, I would still opt probably for the next book to self-publish, but I just wanted to see what it was like. There's another reason why I traditionally published, and I think this is it's an honest answer, which is that although I think the stigma of self-publishing has completely gone away, it used to be, let's say 20 years ago, nobody would think about self-publishing. It felt like vanity publishing. That's all gone now. Self-published books are just as high quality on average. Self-published books probably sell more copies on average than traditionally published books because you control pricing more. But I felt like, all right, it's been 5 or 6 years. Every now and then you kind of want to be a little bit unexpected. Like, I wanted to show for myself and for readers that I'm not doing it one way because I have to, that I have this choice. And I don't know, maybe I was insecure, or maybe it was like a marketing thing for me. It's a little bit of an event to announce when you publish with a traditional publisher. So that's probably the main marketing advantage publishing with a traditional publisher gets you. But I just wanted to go back and forth. But that doesn't, I would still, if I was going to write a novel tomorrow, I would almost 100% chance I would self-publish it. And I have a ton of ideas for books. And I always, I don't know if you've heard some of these, but I always, on my podcast, I sometimes issue these 30-day book challenges, and I always encourage people to self-publish. Many do, and they're great books. So
that's awesome.
That was a long answer. I'm sorry.
No, it's great. And so it sounds like she made the process really easy.
Yes.
I would imagine you said, hey, I want to try something new. I would imagine there was a pretty good size advance. It's kind of the okay, we're recalibrating with a traditionally published book. It seems like she's doing an amazing job. I saw the cover. The cover looks great.
Oh, thank you very much.
Really great cover.
Yeah, I didn't know what I thought about it, but enough people have said it's pops, and I read some about color theory on books, and people say it pops. I always tell people what Seth Godin told me once, which is, can you picture this book on the front table when you walk into Barnes & Noble? Because that's the books that people buy, the ones that stand out on the front table. And I thought that was a really interesting question, because obviously they see that they do judge books on covers. That's why they make covers. And, so I think I could picture this book on the front table.
Yeah. And the yellow, it stands out, it pops, it grabs attention. Yeah. It's a billboard for your book, essentially. I mean, when people are scrolling through Amazon, when they're walking by the airport bookstore, the cover definitely pops. I want to switch gears a little bit, talk some writing, but before that, what's the why? Why publish so many books? How does this fit in with what you're doing from a business perspective, from what you're creating? It just seems like you're super intentional about books, and books are just a huge part of what you do. So why are they so important and such a fundamental piece of your business and of your brand?
Yeah, I don't know if I know the answer. On the one hand, a book is an event, and events affect every part of your life. Kanye West announces he's running for president. That's an event. Whether or not he does it or not, for him, that was enough of an event. It made a billion tweets on Twitter about it. So it's an event that draws notice. At the same time, I enjoy writing. I've been writing every single day since 1990. I didn't publish my first book till 2004. So I enjoy writing, and I enjoy writing articles, but books are often a way to really take, I've been writing all these articles about this one kind of consistent message. Let's take that consistent message, and I have enough material. Let's write this into a book. And for the first 10 years, or for the first 6 years, I was publishing books. It was mostly in the financial space. And then I quit that space 100% in terms of writing books. I occasionally write articles in that space. But in terms of book writing, starting around 2010, I got much more interested in doing not quite self-help, but like narrative, nonfiction, memoirish, based on stories that I've had and problems that I've had and how I've dealt with them. And so sometimes people consider it self-help because some of these problems I've dealt with, and you could see how I've dealt with them, and I apply methods that I experimented on for myself. So whenever I've had something new to say that I felt something really strongly about, I would self-publish or publish. And I think that's really the answer. So there was something I was dealing with for the past few years that it was a problem I was trying to figure out. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure it out. And it all coalesced into this next book called Skip the Line. And it's a little bit different than the theme from Choose Yourself. It's like an evolution from the themes I write about in Choose Yourself. So I figured, okay, this is a real book.
That's cool. And I want to back up just a little bit. You talked about, I think it was 2010 or maybe it was a little bit before that, but the shift from writing financial books to more self-help, kind of those type of books. What sparked that shift? And I know that this just flies in the face of, I feel like, what so many people talk about, which is like, you can't do that, because then it's like, what are you? Are you the financial guy? Are you the self-help book guy? It's just like a lot of times people will spin out a different pen name to do that, to keep them totally separate. Like what sparked the shift, and how have you done that successfully?
I'll answer that. But by the way, have you for some reason seen my next book? Because when you said you can't do that, that's the first chapter. That's what the first chapter is of my next
book. I haven't.
Because seriously, like I'm the type of person that I think at any given point, you should ask yourself, what do you love doing? What do you need to do? And how can you combine the two things? And now you can't always combine tomorrow the two things, or you can't always make money. Like your heart and your mind should be talking. So if you love to write fiction and you can monetize it, then that's absolutely what you should be doing. Again, sometimes you can, sometimes you can, but often we switch careers because of this conversation between our heart and mind. We say, oh my gosh, I'm sick of being a middle-level marketing manager at XYZ factory, and I want to do gardening. And, people say, you can't do that. Like, you can't switch. You're 48 years old or 40 years old or 38 years old. You can't suddenly go to law school or gardening school or become a doctor. Like, people will always tell you you can't whenever you switch passions and interests. And there's nothing wrong with switching careers and industries. And success comes on the other side of all these people who tell you can't do it, because they will tell you every single time, guaranteed. And so that's an important question. And people were saying that to me. I was like this financial guy. I was on CNBC all the time and was writing finance books. I had a decent audience from the finance stuff, but I just kind of gave up. I was kind of depressed. I was always good at making money, but I was also having problems holding on to it. Like my personality would change once I got money, and I'd get, buy stuff or invest in stuff. And I don't know, I would start losing money, and then I'd get depressed. And I was very polarizing somehow in the financial space. Like at the very bottom in March 2009 of the markets, I said, absolutely, this is the time to buy. Here's why. And, various outlets where I was regularly writing or going on their TV shows were saying, oh no, we can't have that guy back on, even though I was 100% right. And I had been pretty much right all through the prior 10 years of doing that. And so I was just like, screw this. I can't really handle it anymore. Like having to get the approval of others. Like, does this TV network approve of me so I can get on TV? Does this newspaper approve of me so I can write for their crappy newspaper? Does this publishing company approve of me so I can write for them? I just want to and then having to defend myself all the time, like, oh, you're wrong, you're right. I just wanted to say, look, I've gone broke so many times, and I've been depressed. I've been suicidal. These are the problems I faced. This is how I dealt with it. And because I had spent so much time developing the writing skill, this was a great format for me to tell these stories, as opposed to just lecture people. Oh, here's what you should do if you go broke, or here's how you should think about investing. I didn't want to just give a list of facts. I wanted to tell my story. And I loved the writing process of telling actual stories that had happened to me. In fact, the stories were so insane. In some cases, people were like, this can't possibly be true. And I'm like, it's 100% true. I've never written any fiction. It's 100% true. And people who knew me would write also in comments, oh no, they didn't believe me. It's unfortunately very true. And then I realized I was just getting a lot more satisfaction from that. And so I literally like downsized and just started writing about this. And it was a while before I was getting a much bigger audience, because a lot of people could relate to going broke and having troubles and getting divorced and having all these issues with everything, with money, addiction, relationships, whatever. And also I had all these strong opinions about education and finance, actually. And so at one point, though, I decided I'm going to write this book, which sort of sums it all up. It's called Choose Yourself. And it's essentially about this. Like, I chose my career. I chose what I wanted to do. I'm choosing to publish this book. I didn't even pitch this book to one person. And then I write about all the stories I had and how I kind of came back from the dead multiple times, and how, what I did and who I dealt with and people I've learned from and mentors I've had, and so many different things. And I put it all together, everything, but including the kitchen sink. I put it together in a book. And, again, like I said earlier, this was the first book I professionally self-published, hired people for every step of the way, really great people for every step of the way, and published that book. And it's sold. I don't think it's sold yet over 1 million copies, but it's probably pretty close to it. And it really led to so many business opportunities. It kind of was that cliche that if you do what you love, you'll eventually make money from it. And that's what happened. Like because even though people saw, like, I was admitting to losing all my money, in 2001, and investing and losing all my money this way and that way, people saw, oh, well, he's honest. He's got nothing to hide. And it started creating business opportunities for myself. Yeah. And so it really was a nice thing. And then I followed that up with Choose Yourself Guide to Wealth. And then people say, well, is this just for entrepreneurs? And I'm like, no. And then I wrote The Rich Employee, which didn't do as well, but was sort of like a Choose Yourself for employees. Yeah. And and then I wrote other books.
Why do you think Choose Yourself resonated so well and sold so well?
I think a couple of things. I think one is, 2013, we were still in kind of a societal post-traumatic stress from the Great Recession. A lot of people lost their jobs. A lot of people went broke. A lot of people were really scared. And, it's really scary when you have a family and kids and, you're a little older, and you go broke, and suddenly everything seems to fall apart. And I think a lot of people related to that. A lot of people were still going through it. It wasn't that far after the financial crisis. And then on top of that, we're hitting a new part of how to get things done in society, where, what we thought was safe and stable, the corporate job, and what we thought was important, getting credentialed. So having a book publisher, having a license or a degree, or a TV show, or this person says I'm great, that this industry says I'm the best, I'm in the top 10, 30 under, whatever. You don't need that anymore. You can start a store that competes with the best fashion lines in the world. You can write a book that competes with, the best books in the world. You can make a TV show that competes with The Office. I don't want to say you can do anything, but you could pretty much do anything. I mean, Elon Musk, yes, he had $1 billion, but he wasn't a physicist. And I know a lot of people who invested in SpaceX who weren't physicists. They started from scratch and they made money now, because that's worth a lot of money, because somehow or other he chose himself to be the best rocket scientist in history without being a rocket scientist. I mean, the U.S. government now is putting men into space for the first time in, I don't know, 10 years or so. So, you know, you can choose yourself if your heart is there, if your mind is there. And I really wanted to explore that for myself personally. And then in the book, I describe how I personally did it. And then I told the story of people who became best-selling musicians without having a record label. You know, there's so many lessons I learned from other people and from my own stories. And, you know, I went broke. I was dead broke. How do I get out of this? And I'm so depressed. How do I come back from this? And will the economy let me? Will people approve of me coming back? Or will I be damned forever by people's opinions of me? So it was really a lot about how I confronted those issues. And so, and I think people related to that and still do, by the way. I sell just as many books per month now as I did in 2014. The book came out in 2013, so it had its pop. But even now, I just got the audio book check, and it's the same amount it's been for the past 24 months in a row.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think a big part of that is kind of what you touched on. It's an empowering concept that people really resonate with, and then it's shareable. So there's built-in virality where it's just like, oh, I read this resonates. I'm going to share this with someone else in my life, because it's very much kind of an empowering, stick it to the man, choose yourself, bet on yourself. Like it's a really empowering kind of concept and methodology.
The principles are even more valid now. Like, think about all the situations I described: jobs not safe, people changing industries, you know, the world kind of confused and depressed. Well, multiply that by 10, and that's where we are now. And I think that's why it's kind of a universal message that won't go away. But again, I think there's some evolution to how I'm thinking. So that's why I wanted to do this next book, Skip the Line. And, you know, again, I chose the more traditional outlet to do it. We'll see how that works in the long run, but I think it'll be fine.
Yeah. Hey, I want to briefly touch on writing stuff, and then I want to transition into like book marketing, podcast, if we have time.
Yeah. I want to ask you about book marketing.
So you're a prolific writer, one of the most creative people I've ever seen. I think you've already touched on this a little bit, but I'd love to hear kind of how you do this. Is like you have the analytical skills to break things down, but then really creative ability to like crystallize that and tell stories in a way that's interesting, that's compelling, but then also you're brutally honest. And I think in a lot of cases, very polarizing, and like you intentionally go for that shock and awe factor. Like how does all that kind of tie into, and for someone who says, maybe I want to be more honest in my writing, or I want to be more creative in my writing, or I want to like be more prolific in my writing, like what's the process look like? Like, how do you do that?
You know, and I'm going to start from the last question and go back, because I'm curious too. I don't intend to be polarizing. Like sometimes I'll have an opinion that's different from most people. If you have an opinion that's the same as most people, there's no point in writing it, because if a million people believe the same thing you do, one of those million people has probably expressed it better than you can. But if you have an opinion that's different than most people, and you've really thought about it, and you're a good storyteller, and you're good at rationally making an argument, and you can combine storytelling with expressing your opinion. You always have to have storytelling in everything. Storytelling is the bridge that gets an opinion from me to you. It's only through storytelling. If I tell you, Chandler, you should believe that there's aliens and you should write in Mike Pence's name for president, you're not going to say, okay, James, got it. I need to tell you a story before you believe that. And I don't have one available for you on that case. But, you know, why do you think I'm so polarizing? I don't really like to have people angry at me. I don't like to be I don't try to be polarizing.
Well, I mean, I think it probably comes from some of the stand-up comedy that you do, but I think also you use polarizing hooks as an attention grabber or a hook or whatever, like to tell the story to get to the main point that you're already trying to tell. Like I like just Twitter or Instagram or whatever. It's like Hassan Minaj calls me a rich asshole, and blah blah blah. It's like you make fun of yourself, so it's
Right.
almost always making fun of yourself, which I think is really relatable, but it's also attention grabbing. So then people are like, wait, hold up, what? And then they read about your point, which is you think that people shouldn't go to college, right? Like, so it's like this weird combination of all those things from my
Right.
perspective.
And people say, oh, he's just trying to be a contrarian, or that's just clickbait. Neither of those things are true. Like Hassan Minaj really did call me an asshole, a rich asshole. And it was so funny because my family's we love Patriot Act. We're all watching it at the same time, me, my daughters, my wife. And suddenly Hassan Minaj says, let's see what these rich assholes think about college. And they have a video of Elon Musk, a video of Peter Thiel, and me. And I'm like, what the hell? And it's like I get lumped in with these billionaires without the actual benefits of being a billionaire. And so I don't know. And Hassan and I have a million mutual friends because of the comedy scene, but it was just funny. But then, yeah, it got me a chance to reiterate my opinion about college, which is more important than ever now that, you know, colleges are doing remote learning, but still charging the same amount. I won't get into the whole thing, but,
Yeah.
you know, and education has become a more mainstream topic compared with when I first wrote about it 15 years ago. But yeah, so I guess stuff like that, again, it's not clickbait, but if you write in a strong way, you're going to be vulnerable. People are going to want to read your words. You're going to have, you know, sentences, paragraphs, chapters are all going to be kind of cliffhangers, and people need that. If you just say, you know, here's what I think about education, well, nobody's going to read about it. If I say, and I'm not trying to get people to click. I'm just trying to be a good writer. If the title is Hassan Minaj calls me a rich asshole, that's just better writing than here's what I think about education today. So it's just better. And
It is. I agree.
you know, because also you always have to think with each word, are there multiple reasons this word is good? So Hassan Minaj, okay, celebrity, you know, calls me. So for some reason, a celebrity has involved me in his life narrative. Rich asshole. Well, how am I? You know, most people who know me will call me either one or the other, but usually not both at the same time. So what is he even talking about? So I want to hear more. So there's multiple ways in to that sentence that, like, you know, multiple ways to want to click for more, as opposed to like, here's what I feel about education. Well, that sounds boring. Education. Who cares what I have to say? And it's just, there's no writing there. That's not a written sentence. That's
Yeah.
a fake sentence almost. And so yeah, I don't try to be polarizing. Like the other day I wrote a Twitter thing, you know, 10 things I've learned from Kanye West, you know, and people thought that was polarizing, but it actually was what I've learned from Kanye West. It was the day after he announced he was running for president. I didn't say I would vote for him, but you know what? Who cares? Maybe I will vote for him. Like, but it's fascinating. He calls his party the birthday party. That is so cool. Like, I want to be at a political party. At a birthday party makes you think like, oh my God, people are hugging me. There's candles, there's cake, there's presents. Of course I'm going to join the birthday party. Like, it feels so Kanye West is such a great example to learn from. Why can't I talk about it? But it became a polarizing thing for reasons I didn't even suspect. So I don't know. You just have to always think out loud. You know, when you walk into a room or when you see something, think first, what's the weirdest thing about this? And that usually leads to more thoughts. Like,
Okay.
You know, the weirdest thing about Kanye West running for president is that he's kind of done a lot of weird things that you could learn from. And how does he keep succeeding at it? So, okay, so now I'll go backwards. The question before was, you know, more about writing, and I'm sorry, now I forget, but the real answer to that one is I don't really think I'm polarizing. I think I'll answer further though. Vulnerability is very important, because I used to talk to a friend of mine who wrote a lot of articles, and I said, you know, there's a reason why people don't like your articles. And I said to him, you brag a lot in your articles, and nobody gives a shit that you jumped 6 feet to dunk a ball when you were in college. Like, I don't care. And it makes me think you're kind of a jerk when that's the first sentence. like when you say this market reminds me of when I jumped 6 feet to dunk a ball, in college. Like, I don't care about you. And but when you're vulnerable, though, people do care about you because they've been through it also. Like when you failed at something, we've all failed at something, and and it's more real. Like when you read Charles Bukowski's novels, or well, let's start with Charles Bukowski. A lot of people have read him. His best works are when he basically wrote memoirs. He called them novels, but they're actually memoirs. And he just reveals so much painful stuff about himself. And he does it in this very simple, non-literary way. You wouldn't think he's a literary writer at all. Actually, he writes at a fourth grade level. Ernest Hemingway writes at a fourth grade level. Bukowski writes at a fourth grade level. And the vulnerability, it's like he talks about getting drunk, but then he meets this girl, but then he can't make it work. Like he can't physically function in that way. And, she yells at him and leaves him. And, it's painful, but you see how he's really just honest. And, he kind of self-published, actually. His first books were self-published. Post Office, his first novel, he wrote that book in 2 weeks and self-published it. And so that sold well over 1 million copies. So I could think of all my favorite authors are very, very vulnerable. That's a writing skill, and good writing comes from self-awareness about, don't do failure porn. Don't talk about failure just for the shock value. Like, oh, I was standing on the roof of the Empire State Building trying to decide whether to jump or not, when I realized I could do better than this. Like, don't just do failure porn. Really dive deep into what you did wrong and why, and how you felt, and the shame you felt, and the fear you felt, how you were going to ever get out of this. That's vulnerable. And then that's the start. And then you structure it with writing, like say things in unique ways, have cliffhangers every sentence if you can. And when I say things in unique ways, there are so many great examples. Don't just say he was 6'3". Just say, because no one knows. I don't know if I look at you, Chandler. I don't know if you're 6 feet, 6 foot. I don't have a ruler with me all the time. Say, like my God, he's taller than the 3 tallest women I ever went out with if you stack them on top of each other. now there's, I just told a little story there. Like, do I go out with midgets all the time? Who are these 3 women? Like, why am I thinking about them? Is this guy unnaturally tall? Like, what's going on here? But you get a visual image instead of 6'3". I don't know what 6'3" means. That's a man-made measurement. It has nothing to do with my life. I don't know if it's 72 degrees outside. I could just say, oh my gosh, it was so hot that I finally realized I was more water than bones. Like, say something in a really weird, unique way. That's writing.
Oh man, that's so good. We could go forever on writing. This is amazing. I hope people are taking good stuff out of this. I mean, you talked about being creative, being vulnerable, being a prolific writer. And I think I was going to ask a question, but we don't have time for it. And I think you really already answered it, which is what you learned from stand-up comedy in writing. But you said the question, which is, what's the weirdest thing about this?
Absolutely. And you know what? That I think in writing, I learned to be skeptical in every situation. From comedy, I learned what is the weirdest, most screwed up thing about everything I'm looking at. If I go into a bar mitzvah and everybody else is congratulating the bar mitzvah boy and saying hi to their family, I'll look at the bacon being served in the hors d'oeuvres and think, that's a little odd for a bar mitzvah. Or if you go into a restaurant, you're on a first date, you go into a restaurant, everyone else is looking, is the food good? What's the menu look like? What are the people dressed like? If there's a disco ball in the middle of the ceiling, that's an odd thing to have in a nice restaurant. Most people don't notice it. So you always want to look at the weirdest thing in the room.
Hey, switching gears to marketing, because I got to ask you a couple questions here. Book marketing. What are like top 3 to 5 things that you do to market your books? Like, what does that approach look like? I know you also, I think, do some unconventional things there? Like how do you view book marketing? What are the top things that you've seen that work?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question because the answers, as you know, change occasionally. But I would say first, the cliche thing is write a good book that people are going to want to share. So you cannot have a bestseller if nobody is sharing your book. You have to write something so that I say to my friend, Chandler, you've got to read this book. If you haven't read this book, you got to read it. And that comes from the writing. So let's leave that aside for a second. Just in terms of book marketing, the basic answer is go on a lot of podcasts because, people used to go on these book tours. All right, best case, 100 people show up for your reading at a bookstore. And readings are kind of boring. So, out of those 100 people, maybe 4 people buy the book, 10 people buy the book. And by the way, that's a lot. 3 people might show up. 1 people might show up for your book reading. So the traditional book tour, forget about the pandemic and the lockdown. The traditional book tour has been dead for at least 5 to 10 years. Go on podcasts. You go on a podcast, you're getting anywhere from 1,000 extra listeners to 100,000 or 1,000,000 extra listeners, depending on the podcast. Some percentage of those will buy the book. So again, you have to write a book that's interesting enough and good enough to go on a podcast. So by the way, fiction books don't really get on podcasts very much. So you have to find a hook if you write a fiction book to get on a podcast. But people think, oh no, I need to have a big Twitter following. No, if you have 100,000 Twitter followers, best case, 0.5% is going to go out day one and buy your book. So social media is important for the mainstream publishing industry. It's not as important as people think. The real important thing is going on a lot of podcasts. And alongside of that, I'm lumping this into the same category. Get people with big email lists to write about you. So I have a big email list. You probably have a big email list. Like Ryan Holiday puts out his favorite books every month. If you get on that email list, it's great. Or there's a site, bookbub.com. They specifically send out book offers, I think, every single day. Get on that email list. Those are enormous opportunities. Sometimes, like BookBub, I think is a paying opportunity. Like you have to pay a little bit. It's like an advertising thing. But podcasts, email lists, that's the social media that's most important. Don't worry so much about TikTok or Instagram. Those are important, don't get me wrong, but they're not the most important things. Podcast people are listening to you. So if you have a good story and a good hook to get on the podcast, people are going to buy your book. Third is what I call events. Make sure, and this is something you have to plan in advance, like I'm going through this right now for my next book. What are you going to do? What is going to happen that is going to put you in the news or put you on people's radar, ancillary, in tangent to your book coming out? So guess what? Kanye West announced he's running for president. 3 days later, it's no coincidence, his latest album dropped. So he created an event independent of the album, and now people are buying the album. His album, I'm sure, is going to be #1 on Billboard. I have no idea if it is or not. I'm just guessing, but my guess is it is, because that was a really strong event that he did. I remember when Tucker Max was putting out the book Assholes Finish First, he offered to donate $500,000 to any Planned Parenthood that would change its name to the Tucker Max Planned Parenthood. That's a genius event. And he was serious about it. That was a genius event. And, Ryan Holiday, who's a genius at marketing, helped Tucker plan and execute on that. So don't be afraid to figure this out with a team of people. But when I put out Choose Yourself, I did a couple of things. One is I created a month in advance. This is in May 2013. I created the first Bitcoin-only bookstore. You could only buy books in my, I'm a programmer. You can only buy books in my bookstore with Bitcoin only. The only book in my bookstore was Choose Yourself. So I then announced I am the best-selling Bitcoin-only author in history. And so CNBC asked me on to talk about this big announcement I made. And the anchor even asked me, did you just do this in order to market your book? And I said, well, I'm on national TV right now. So I think it worked. And it did. And, another thing I did was you have to do everything seriously and sincerely. So I sincerely announced I was running for Congress. But then, and I got to the point where I was, looking at hiring campaign managers. I was interviewing people, but then some weird things happened. This one presidential candidate wanted to endorse me, but I had to like pay some money to these different groups, and it was very weird. So I dropped out, and that became my event, is dropping out. And then I went on a bunch of podcasts and a bunch of radio shows explaining why I dropped out of running for Congress. So I didn't have to actually run anymore. I still had the event. And so those two events were pretty strong. Then the third event I had was, and this is the benefit of self-publishing, is I offered right in the forward, I offered to pay people back if they could prove to me that they bought and read the book. And I didn't say I'll pay you back if you write a review. I said, and I was sincere about this, I said, look, I know people only value what they pay for. So that's why I'm not just giving the book out for free. You have to show me you paid for the book. And I want to make sure you read it. So you, somehow or other, I don't know how you do it, you have to prove that you read it. Well, the obvious thing that comes to mind is then people have to write reviews. So I had a lot of reviews pretty quickly. And, you know, you can't tell people to write reviews. That's against Amazon's rules. So, but this was a kind of backdoor way to sincerely ask people if they liked the book to review it. By the way, not everybody gave it a 5-star review, and they still asked for their money back. Only, and I will say though, only about 2/3 of 1% asked for their money back. So I had a bet that it would be less than 1%, and I won that bet. And so that was kind of, you know, having 3 marketing events. And then I went on a bunch of podcasts, which was early then, and I spoke at some events. And, you know, you only need like a few thousand copies sold that first day, and you'll hit #1 in the entire Amazon bookstore, and that kind of feeds itself. And by the way, my book was very shareable. It was very easy to read. You know, people tell me, and they don't want to insult me, oh, I read your book in a day. That's how I wrote it. I wanted it to be read in a day, and then I wanted you to just give it to your friend. And so it was very shareable. And, you know, then it got on a bunch of bestseller lists. It was probably the highest ranking at that time. It was the highest ranking nonfiction self-published book ever at Amazon. So I built a great relationship with Amazon. And so, you know, all of that stuff helped. And I just want to express again, it's not as important to build up your TikTok following. It's more important to write something that is shareable, write something that podcasters will want to have you on, and then think of these events around you, which is that part's hard. I mean, it's all hard. Well, let me ask you, I have to ask you though, like you're an expert on this. What am I not thinking of? Like, what do you recommend people do for marketing?
The only thing, and we can have a whole nother conversation on this, and maybe it's worth doing, and because I definitely have a couple more questions I want to ask before our time runs out. But the only thing I can think of, like immediately right offhand, I love the emphasis on reviews, but then also ads. So especially for your self-published books, so it's like running ads, being specific, and that's
Where
more
do you run the ads?
long-term. That's Amazon ads. You mentioned BookBub. You can run BookBub ads. Things like that. And you might cap out a little bit on velocity, but just, I mean, we found that works really well for our students, and then just really emphasizing reviews. So you're boosting Amazon algorithm, which helps with ongoing sales, both from a review perspective and from an ads perspective. But then you're also getting just a lot of like customer also bought like a lot of that stuff from an ads perspective.
So is there a way to optimize the Amazon ads?
Oh, 100%. It's like any other marketplace. So you target based on author names. You can target based on books, specific books. You can target based on keywords. You can target based on all that stuff. So it's very similar to other ad platforms. But then you can optimize your bidding. Really, the main thing that I've seen is the cap it's highly profitable in almost all cases, and it's a total blue ocean right now. But the only cap is your spending. Like there's capped inventory. So that's yeah, good.
I will say that I tried Amazon ads about a year ago, and they worked. So like for Choose Yourself, and this was 6 years after I wrote the book, so it's unusual. But I would say for Choose Yourself, when I started doing the ads, it was consistently in the top 1,000 of the Amazon bookstore. And then it's about, you know, and then it immediately lost that when I stopped the ads. So, and I see Ray Dalio does ads. A lot of famous authors do ads, and it helps the book.
For sure.
And probably podcast ads work. I haven't tried that. I haven't tried Facebook ads, but I guess if you target correctly, they will work.
Yeah, you can. It's just hard. It's really hard to get tracking because you have to use like an Amazon Associates affiliate link, and then the tracking is a little janky, and then that's also against Amazon's terms or Amazon/Facebook's terms of service. So you're kind of playing with fire there. It's hard to track. Amazon will give you a lot of the data that you want and need to effectively run and optimize those campaigns. So it's definitely possible. It's just a little bit more difficult. I want to ask a follow-up on podcast stuff. I seem to be remembering this, but I couldn't find proof of this when I was quickly searching. Were you the person that did like a 24-hour podcast marathon?
No, but but the reason you might think that is I was planning on that, and I've been planning on that at different points, and I'm still planning on it at some point, but I've never actually done it. This things got in the way at different. Well, for one thing, this pandemic also got in the way. I was going to do it. I was going to do a 76-hour one to break a record. So we'll see. Maybe that's the event that I do. I have a couple of ideas for events in this one. And I also think advertising on BookBub, advertising on podcasts would be good. Advertising on Amazon would be good. The other thing is, let me ask you this. Have you ever thought about buying a book review Instagram account? So like popular book review Instagram accounts.
Not popular Instagram accounts. It's a good idea, but I've thought about buying book review companies. It just makes sense. Like for us and for me, especially, it makes sense because it would be a value add for all of our authors, but then it'd be a value add for my books, for anything like that. So we could run those sites. And I've looked at buying a couple because oftentimes the bottleneck is average order value and customer acquisition. And we have both of those / wouldn't necessarily need the average order value. We would position it more as a value add for our authors.
That's great.
Yeah. I love kind of keying in on the three things, talking about going on a ton of podcasts, getting people with big email lists to write about you, or, BookBub ads or BookBub promotions, events, or it sounds like there's a kernel of publicity stunts in there, but in an authentic, genuine way. Is there a kind of last question or two here? Is there anything that you're doing differently with your next book? Skip the line. I noticed you've already started building buzz around that. It's a few months out on the launch horizon. Anything you're doing differently?
I think a little bit. I'm preparing for the marketing more in advance. So with Choose Yourself, I kind of plan my marketing with maybe 2 months to go. And I think it's more important to plan it with 6 months to go. And, obviously this time I'm using a traditional publisher, which is the first time in a while. So that's differently. And one thing that's very, very different was my writing process for this book. So this book, I basically wrote from scratch, from beginning to end. And even with Choose Yourself, with a lot of my books, I'll usually take my most popular articles because I know they were popular for a reason. They resonated with people. And I would just sort of rewrite them into the book, which is not a bad way to do things, by the way. A lot of books are written that way. You would be surprised. Most books that are the best-selling books you've ever seen are written that way. And but with this one, I really, it was more difficult for me because I really wrote it from scratch. I mean, I used some ideas that I had written before, but I really expanded on everything and dived a lot more into original writing for this book. So that was different.
Cool. Final question here. So, James, I mean, we just covered so much ground on the writing front, on the book marketing front. Just love unpacking the way that you think about things, because I think it's really unique and really creative. And I hope that was really helpful for people. Kind of final question being, knowing what you know now, 25 books in that are published, 2/3, I think you said self-published, 1/3 traditionally published. So a lot of different experience, different genres, different all that. What would be your advice for the person who's listening to this podcast, watching this on the YouTube channel, that's like the James from 25 books ago? So like they're thinking about writing and publishing their first book, and you've got all this experience. Like, what would be kind of your parting advice for that person?
Well, most important thing is to be a good writer. And what I would say is, to be a good writer, I almost hate to be cliche about it, you have, so I'll try not to be, but you have to read really good writers. And that's so important. And by really good writers, I don't mean read really good nonfiction books. I specifically mean read really high quality fiction books that you love. And the reason is, if you're going to read a nonfiction book about, I don't know, politics, that's about it. If you're going to read a nonfiction book about, I don't know, the Civil War, the author is an expert on the Civil War. He or she is not necessarily an expert at writing. He or she spent 30 years becoming an expert on the Civil War and now is transmitting that 30 years of experience to you. They didn't spend 30 years writing. So I like to read great writers because they spent 30 years writing. And so they're by far, they're 1,000 times better than the nonfiction writers. So read really beautiful writing. You don't have to write beautifully for your book, but at least know the difference between good writing and mediocre writing and bad writing. And then the other thing is, you kind of have to write every day, and you kind of have to publish a lot so you get feedback and you know what works and you know what doesn't, and you have to experiment a lot. So, try different styles, try writing in the first person, second person, third person, letters back and forth, try writing from future you to past you, play around, do experiments, take a nonfiction format, like I'm filling out my application to the DMV, and that becomes a chapter or an article or a short story or whatever, is just the application to the DMV in a fictional way I would fill it out. So I once wrote an article that was basically, I did an actual Kickstarter and turned that into an article. And so you play around with formats and ideas. And, so experimentation is very important. And then the other thing is, have an opinion that's unique. If you're just writing about, here's 10 things I don't like about, Trump or whatever. I read that a billion times a day on Twitter. I don't need to read another book on it. Like, have a unique take on things. Say, here's 10 reasons why the world is definitely in a virtual reality simulation. And by the way, anything that you think should be a book is actually a chapter. So now, and when you think of 10 books,
cool.
Now you've come up with 10 chapters, you have one book. So like what I just said about a virtual, that's a chapter of some other book, like 10 crazy things to think about the world. That might be what that chapter fits into. And if you want one quick 30, here's a book you could write in 30 days. Do you mind, Chandler, if I give a book?
Hit it.
So come up with a concept that you're interested in, a nonfiction concept, like whether it's entrepreneurship or negotiation or publishing or cancer or sports, and then go to one of these database sites that has academic papers like ssrn.com or jstor.com. Type in the search box negotiation, and maybe 1,000 academic papers will come up. Papers from MIT, Yale, Stanford, all over the world about negotiation. Pick 10 of those papers. Now, they're going to be impossible to read. So it's not like, you could say, here's 10, your book's going to be called now 10 scientifically proven ways to become a better negotiator, and pick 10 papers, explain, according to such and such, chapter 1, negotiate like this. And then according to this study done by MIT professor, blah, 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 they did this, and they proved this is how you be a better negotiator. Don't get to know yes first, get to know first is better. And I'm making that up. I don't know. And that's a valuable service because people can't read academic papers because they're impossible to read. So you've just interpreted for the layman, and it's okay to source your information. Then tell a story from your own life where that either worked or didn't work, and then tell a story from history or two where that either worked or didn't work. And 10 chapters, write one chapter every 3 days. It's very easy to do. And boom, you have a book. And then you say, well, what if everybody does this? I guarantee you'll pick 10 different papers than everyone else. Like, everybody will pick different papers. So all of you could follow this advice, have a book in 30 days, and no book will overlap at all.
That's great. I love that. Hey, who's taking the challenge? Let us know. Let me know.
We'll both tweet it out. If you publish a book on it, if you self-publish a book doing this technique.
Awesome. That sounds great. James, this has been amazing, man. Really, really insightful interview.
Again, I'm so glad we finally did this. This is great.
Yeah. Where can people go to find out more about you, your books, and kind of plug into your world?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm really big on Google Earth. You can find me on Google Earth somewhere.
Awesome.
That's my
Well,
thing.
cool. Hey, James, thank you so much.
Thank you, Chandler. This has been great. Thank you.